Welcome back to the Fox News Specialists. Our specialists today are Laura Ingram and Chris Stirewalt. So let's continue our conversation. Attorney General Jeff Sessions announcing a massive overhaul in sentencing criminals, reversing Obama-era policies that some critics said were too lenient, especially on drug crimes.
We know that drugs and crime go hand in hand. They just do. The facts prove that's so. Drug trafficking is an inherently dangerous and violent business. If you want to collect a drug debt, you can't file a lawsuit in court. You collect it with the barrel of a gun. If you are a drug trafficker, we will not look the other way. We will not be willfully blind to your misconduct. You drug dealers are going to prison.
All right, the new policy orders federal prosecutors to seek the most severe charges possible against criminal suspects. Okay, Starwell, I'm going to start with you on this. Now, I'm going to kind of put on my former criminal defense lawyer hat around this.
Okay.
I think the problem here is that with the Eric Holder and Obama-era things, they really were making, I think they put a Band-Aid on this issue. What they were really trying to address were the mandatory minimums to sentencing reform, which is, by the way, a bipartisan effort. And instead of doing that, going to the heart of reforming that issue, they say, well, let's just turn the other way around some of the most severe crimes to avoid the most severe penalties. And now we have what we have now coming out of session.
And this relates to things like charging crack cocaine, cocaine base differently than actual cocaine, da-da-da-da-da. We should remember in this discussion the purpose of the institution of these laws under the Clinton administration. The purpose of the institution of these laws was not about drugs. It was about street crime and murder. It was about places like Baltimore, Detroit, Washington, D.C., when Washington, D.C. had almost 1,000 murders in the late 1980s and the early 1990s each year. These laws were designed to take people off the streets who were gangbangers who were involved in this stuff. So these are not laws about, these were not primarily laws about drug interdiction primarily. They were about cleaning up bad neighborhoods, Cabrini Green, cleaning up the streets, and people like Jeff Sessions would argue that increases in violent crime in communities might have something to do with the rollback of these
the war on drugs has been so successful. That's why overdose deaths are going up constantly. This is so ridiculous. That he withdrew part of Eric Holder's Smart on Crime initiative, which encouraged people to focus on serious crimes and reduce the amount of people that are going to prison for nonviolent crimes. Why was that a bad thing? Who's thinking that it's a bad thing that we don't have tons and tons of people incarcerated for ridiculous amounts of time because of a nonviolent crime?
Well,
and it's more expensive, and it doesn't do anybody any good. I don't see the justification for it other than some sort of ideological thing of bad people do drugs, which, by the way, Jeff Sessions has said. He said good people don't smoke marijuana. Oftentimes, annoying people smoke marijuana, but saying that good people don't smoke marijuana, that says everything that needs to be said about his position on this issue.
Brought to you by, no,
I'm serious.
I think what Jeff Sessions is doing is what Donald Trump campaigned on, a return to law and order in the United States. The drug crimes in the country disproportionately affect the poor and the minorities, and it's devastating.
Okay. Being in prison disproportionately affects the poor and minorities, particularly in terms of drug offenses.
Right, Catherine. What I'm trying to get to is that the drug pushers in this country, especially those connected with the criminal gang element, Florencia 13, the Latin Kings, MS-13, which are marauding the streets of Chicago, Detroit, here in New York City, even with crime down. This has been devastating. It's been devastating to the poorest communities. If Democrats or libertarians want to go across the country making this big case that we need to be more compassionate to the drug pushers, then I think we should have that debate morning, noon, and night.
Nonviolent criminals.
Eric.
Well, I don't think that's what he was focusing on today. He wasn't focusing on the nonviolent criminals.
Right. Well, listen, I understand. I agree with Laura that this is something that Donald Trump and his base are very, very strong and adamant about. Personally, I've been on record saying, look, I think we overfought the war on drugs when it's in my opinion, I don't think it's a winnable war. I think the smarter avenue is to get tougher on immigration, get tougher on MS-13 coming across the border, get tougher on drug people, mules bringing drugs across the border.
And the war on drugs, and they won't want to come over anyway.
I mean, listen, look, if you're tied to a drug crime and a violent crime, then you go away.
More kids are smoking pot in Colorado today. By the way, do we all think that's a good thing?
My son is in Colorado right now, Laura.
Do we all think that's a good thing? Yay, more kids are smoking.
Should we throw them all in prison?
But we should.
No, I don't think we should give it the imprimatur of legitimacy. Once you do that, kids think it's not a big deal. Mom and Dad smoking on the weekend, no big deal. Why can't I? If that's what we think is going to get our country going down the right road, then we should all just say it. Forget about the schizophrenia it increases the chances of getting. Forget about all the psychosis.
What's America's #1 drug problem today?
Opioids. Heroin.
Prescription drugs. They're not coming over the border. They're coming from outside the United States.
Well, no, that's not true. That's not true. A lot of the heroin is coming from Mexico now, not from
Korea. Korea is a major supplier of opioids.
I'm talking about opioid prescription drugs that are ravaging this country. This addiction. This is the problem.
You can't say they're not coming across the border.
They're making them. They're synthetic manufacture.
I understand. What I'm saying is we have a problem in broken communities, broken cultures, broken spaces where people are not binding together to take care of each other. There is no governmental solution that is going to deal with this in the same way that strong communities, strong families, and strong neighborhoods will.
You can also put those guys in jail, the drug pushers. Put them in jail.
But, Laura, I don't think anybody...
What defines a drug pusher?
Someone who sells illegal narcotics.
In this moment, though, Laura, I don't think most people think that drug offenders need to just be celebrated, right? But what I'm talking about is when we talk about specifically what Jeff Sessions is talking about today, this is a mandatory minimum issue. Now, as an attorney, my issue is this. I have a problem with mandatory minimums, though, E, because it takes discretion out of our trusted judges and prosecutors. Why do we have a system if we don't trust them?
You may be right about mandatory minimums. Listen, I think we need reform in that area, absolutely. But, you know, you can draw a distinction between a dealer, a distributor, and a user.
And the judge can do that. And the judge can do that themselves. Why a mandatory minimum? Maybe someone has no priors, they have a great life, but they just had like a certain number of pills. They had this number, and they had like were one over for a certain sentence.
That is not what Sessions was addressing today.
I don't think that
he was addressing a change in culture, focusing on incarceration of people for doing drugs, which is very negative and ineffective.
I think the culture that was encouraged under the Obama administration was one of more placidity toward the drug culture. There's no doubt about it. And it's a new game now. And I guess we're going to see how that works with Trump. Maybe it'll be an ultimate failure. It could be a complete failure, in which case you'll be proven right. But I think most people think it's a little out of hand.
Most Americans vote for legal marijuana.
What we know is that we need a lot of criminal justice reform in this country.